All right, welcome. This is Larry Loh, music director of Symphoria. I'm very excited to welcome our guest soloist, violinist Hannah White. Hannah, welcome.
Hi, it's so nice to meet you, and I can't wait to play with you guys.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. This is going to be our first time working together, and first time I think for both of us to conduct or play this piece. The Joseph Bologna Chevalier de Saint Georges Concerto Number 1 in G major, and I know that we called you because like our situation here in Syracuse, we're lucky that we've been able to play all year, but we have had varying sizes of orchestra, and so once we were able to have a fuller orchestra and invite you to do this, it wasn't that many weeks ago that we asked you to play this, and you very graciously just dove right in to learn this piece from from the ground up. What is that process like for you?
Um, well, I didn't even know this composer until you guys asked me to play this. So it was kind of like, okay, so first of all, I got the music and they only had like the orchestra score. So
Okay.
I had to cut and paste and like put the violin part together. And anyway, so I went on YouTube and there's one recording that thank God was posted 4 months ago so I could have something to listen to. So
Okay.
the first thing that came to my head was I need to memorize this because it's coming up really soon. So I told myself I have a week to, just learn the notes and memorize it. Within that week, I'm gonna come to lesson and have it memorized and start working on like the juicy stuff. So that's kind of my mindset. And memorizing it wasn't that bad because it makes sense. Like musically, it's kind of like it sounds like early Haydn, early Mozart. And it's just very, it's lively and it's the patterns make sense. Except there's a few parts he puts where you're just flying up high, where there's like no good fingering options to have. But other than that, it was pretty. I think it's fairly easy to memorize. It's not like Brahms or something that's not in the fingers. So I think it was pretty. Yeah, that was my
It's
thought.
interesting. No, I mean, I think the idea of diving in and memorizing it immediately, because something like the Brahms, I would assume before you played it, that you had heard it, that it was something that was kind of in your head already. But this one, you didn't know the composer. I'm not sure if your teacher at Colburn, if Lipset also did he know the piece going into it?
He is before me. He was teaching another student, Galia. I think it was Concerto number 9, and that's the more famous one. But
Mhm.
this is both of our first time like diving into this piece. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, that's interesting because it's an old piece, and typically pieces like that have generations of traditions
Mhm.
and things that people kind of expect from the piece. But in the case for you and your teacher discovering it, having one YouTube reference, I feel like the door is open to anything as far as interpretation and musical choices and stuff like that. So I would imagine that takes a little bit of the pressure off of, feeling like you have to consider things that other people have done.
Right. Yeah. I see where you're coming from. It's also, as you were saying, how it's not like in your head. You know how like Tchaikovsky, everyone plays Tchaikovsky and like that interpretation. And that was a fear of mine. Like, I don't know this. Like, how am I going to remember the patterns or anything? But again, it was pretty, sorry, I'm looking at the score as I'm
No, that's
talking.
all right. Yeah. Any chance you get to reference the score, because the adrenaline of the of upcoming concert that's very quick. I would imagine you probably keep the score nearby, just if you're trying to think of something or trying to think of something with your memory. I did want to ask you actually about the memorization process because it's so different with other people, with various people. Some people have a visual memory, some people have a physical memory or combination, or some people do it all by ear. What is it for you?
For me, it's a combination between physical and ear. Probably more so ear.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I need to even just hearing myself constantly run it. Like I make sure I run the entire thing like whenever I practice.
Yeah.
So just to get myself used to it, and then the patterns. So I think that's where the physical part comes in for me, is just like the patterns, and then but I need to know, like, have it in my like brain going.
Right.
Yeah. And another interesting fact is that there's no piano part to practice like with a pianist. So Mr. Lipson hired one of the students at Coburn to write the piano part from the orchestra score, and she did it within like 5 days. And then I played it with my pianist here in Wisconsin for my recital on Friday.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah, so I think it'll be good because that was another fear, just knowing the orchestra part and knowing when to come in, because you can know your part, but then putting it in with the orchestra part could be something else.
Right, because you don't want to be just counting measures. You want to be thinking like in your head, memorizing also the sound of the orchestra in between.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, this other student who did that, they should just absolutely publish it and sell it, because if it doesn't exist, this is something that will be great for for other violinists who are learning this piece. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about. I was just curious about some of your other, like favorite kinds of pieces to play, so we can get a sense of, what sorts of things you like, musically. So some of your favorite concertos to perform. Maybe tell us about a recent pre-COVID amazing experience with an orchestra playing a concerto.
Okay. So my favorite things to play. I try to like everything I play, because I feel like if you don't, you're not gonna have that connection, I feel like. But that being said, I do prefer music with like more depth to it. Like I wouldn't, want to get up and play like a HAYDN, some like sonata or something like that in that like nature. I do like stuff with, and that's what I like about this concerto. It's a little bit of both. Like you have some depth to it that comes in, and then you have some lively, and then some, and that's what I like about this concerto. But I do like concertos like Sibelius, because I think that's just a strong, in general, 3 movements. Same with like Tchaikovsky. I like the Shostakovich Violin Concerto. And yeah, stuff like that. Barber's really good. As far as performances, I recently just played with the San Francisco Chamber Orchestra. We did the Vivaldi Spring, and we did the Piazzolla version, which was really fun.
Oh yeah, very fun.
Yeah, and then prior to that, in November, I played with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, and we did Bach, A minor. Sorry, I have to think about theory real quick. Yeah, we played that.
Yeah. Oh, excellent. We probably just missed each other in Dallas, because I was there also last November.
Really?
So that's fantastic though. Well, I really look forward to meeting you in person and working on this piece with you. It's going to be such a joy to get to present this music with such a stellar soloist as yourself for our audience. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us beforehand. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Thank you so much, and I can't wait to play with you guys and meet you finally.
Okay, and now I'm very excited to welcome to the program my friend and our program annotator. Please welcome Peter Rabinowitz. Peter, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Larry. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so let's talk about the origins of this program. And I know you had a hand in it, because you're really good at finding connections between pieces, and really specific pieces by specific composers. And in this case, all during the quote unquote classical era. Can you tell us a little bit about the origin of this program in our discussions?
Yeah, actually, if I can remember, and of course, as our listeners should know, the process of creating these programs takes a long time. We look at them, we write things down, we discuss them. There's a large group of people involved. Things change. But as I recall, it was actually the Saint Georges Concerto that got us started. That we were looking for some music that would fulfill our commitment to diversity, and that here was this absolutely fabulous, very, very important composer, performer, conductor, fencer, revolutionary, abolitionist guy in the 18th century, who has been sort of in and out of people's consciousness over the years, but has been moving back in now. We thought it'd be really nice to do something with him. It was Casual Concert. We were looking for small pieces, and I guess the idea of Paris as a central idea seemed, a good place. So, of course, immediately you think of Mozart's Paris Symphony. But then we thought about what would go with the Mozart and the Saint-Georges. And we realized that Saint-Georges was the person who really conducted, actually instigated Haydn's 6 symphonies that he wrote for Paris. So everything was sort of fit together as this sort of almost magical combination of pieces. And I think they work so well together. And I'm so excited to be hearing this concert. 2 pieces by composers we know and love. In fact, this is the 3rd concert in a row that's had Mozart on it. And 1 composer who we ought to know and love well, who sort of has gotten a little bit forgotten.
Yeah, so I find it fascinating that had it not been for Saint-Georges as a conductor, as a person, as a catalyst for a composer like Haydn to write music for a specific occasion, we wouldn't have these symphonies. There wouldn't be then the symphonies that followed all the way up to his 104. And so you have this amazing moment where Bologna de Saint-Georges, where he moved Haydn in a different direction. And I find also the connection of style between the Mozart Paris Symphony and the Haydn Bear Symphony to also have some parallels, even like just the opening of both symphonies has a very similar kind of trajectory.
Well, that raises an important point for me anyway. We tend to think, often you just have these cliches, it used to be Mahler and Bruckner, everybody thought of them together, although now we realize they're nothing at all alike, except the symphonies are long and loud. And people say, oh, Haydn, Mozart, they kind of wrote the same kind of music. Of course, they didn't write the same kind of music at all. Can you talk a little bit about the differences between, this is young Haydn and very mature, young Mozart and very mature Haydn, but there are also basic differences in the way they write, and there must be basic differences in what you have to do as a conductor.
Yeah, well, the biggest difference is just, that Mozart writes these really long phrases, these really long connective melodies. The structures are, made up of bigger blocks. So, and that's a huge generality. But even if you take this symphony, you take certain themes that Mozart wrote, they traverse many, many measures, whereas a lot of Haydn's are within 1 or 2 measures. So you have these very quick instances that are repeated over and over again. And so the question of style comes up a lot with Haydn. And it's almost impossible to play Haydn in a romantic way, just because of the nature of the music and the gestures of the music. Whereas Mozart is very easy to produce like a thicker sound and to have a heavier hand. And it kind of translates in that way, if that's what you want out of Mozart. So I find that's
not what you want, Larry.
No, it's not what I want personally.
It's not what you're going to give us either.
No, it's not what we're going to get this for this concert. But it's interesting that it can work, for a certain ear in different ways, whereas the Haydn really does not work unless you play it with a lighter hand.
And how about, one of the things that Haydn is famous for is his sense of humor, the jokes that go all the way through. Now, Mozart was no sourpuss either, but there's something about Haydn's humor which is a little bit different. Is there something in this symphony that people should be looking out for, some kinds of surprises? Sure.
Well, the last movement of this symphony is where it gets its name.
Yeah.
The nickname of the bear, and it has these grace note pedal notes in the lower strings that apparently was the kind of music that would accompany trained bears to dance.
Right.
And it's kind of humorous, have this kind of these low octaves and the low strings playing this very kind of, I think for the time, immediately recognizable reference, which would make it really funny for the audience. And for us, we have to, because we're not accustomed to seeing dancing bears at the state fair here in New York, that we have
illegal.
To play it. Right. We have to play it in such a way that has humor implicit in the music itself. And so for me, it would be maybe just a little bit of exaggerating the grace note, which is always on a note that's a little bit odd, below the constant note in the harmony. And I think having that sort of thing, regardless of what reference you have, or if you read the program notes, you will find that has a little bit of humor.
Yeah. Now, going back to the third person, or the central person on our program, Saint Georges, one of the things, by now we all have standard editions of Mozart and Haydn, and if you want to play a Mozart symphony, you don't run into all kinds of difficulties. There have been some confusions with regard to this as to exactly what it was that we were going to play. You want to talk a little bit about that and why playing unfamiliar old music is very different from playing the standards?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting because I in my talk with Hannah just before you zoomed into the call, we talked a little bit about how even though this music is centuries old, that in a way there's less pressure because there isn't this long history of acclaimed recordings that people have to adhere to, where certain interpreters created traditions that others either followed or deviated from. In this case, there's maybe one recording of this particular concerto. There were a lot of things about it that were difficult. Obtaining parts and matching scores is difficult because you can't really get that very easily. I have to go through my score, which is one particular edition, and make sure that it matches up with all the parts that the orchestra has, because that's from another edition. So it's just materials that people have to play from. It's difficult to just get them and to make sure that they all match up. And then beyond that, even identifying the concerto itself, because there are several concertos that he wrote, like a dozen concertos for violin. There are a few that are in G major. There are a few that are called Concerto Number 1. And so you have to line all the things up with which opus is it, and which number, and which key, and are you doing this cadenza or no cadenza? There's so many questions and so many things that you have to make sure about before you get to that first rehearsal. And so, that's a part of the work of doing a piece like this that just isn't done that much.
Yeah. And I think, my guess is that many years ago, people did run into similar kinds of problems with even the standard things, because the numbering systems weren't quite worked out until quite a long time after they had written them. I was just actually doing some work on the Dvorak symphonies and realized how recently it was that the New World Symphony was called Symphony Number 9 rather than Symphony Number 5. And I could imagine somebody coming along and saying, I'm going to do the Dvorak Fifth Symphony, and have half the orchestra think you're doing the New World and half you're doing an entirely different piece. Yep. So
one of my editions up in my bookshelf calls it Number 5. So it's always it's just the more piece gets done, the more standardized the referencing of that piece become, and hopefully that will happen with a lot of the other works that should be performed regularly by orchestras everywhere. And I'm really glad that we are diving into the Saint Georges, and we have some Saint Georges planned for next year. So next season, this will be a great getting to know period, long overdue, and hopefully with lots to follow. Peter, thank you so much for joining us.
Well,
for this time.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm really looking forward to what is going to be a fantastic concert.
Yeah, thank you.